Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. Great to have you in the conversation. Talking about the senatorial election in the state of Mississippi. Chris McDaniel, Tea Party favorite, young, articulate, dynamic, rising star, I believe, in the Republican Party, taking on Senator Thad Cochran, who has been an incumbent, been there for 41 years. And Thad Cochran saying, look, I don't really know anything about the Tea Party. And in my judgment, he just cost himself the election. I mean, it's just kind of a staggering admission for somebody to make, that he is so detached, so disengaged, so uninvolved that after 5 years, on the 5th anniversary virtually of the rise of the Tea Party, he doesn't really know anything about it. I mean, you would think that his campaign staff would at some point have said, look, in case this question comes up, here's how you ought to handle that. But he seemed completely clueless about the Tea Party. That's just not going to sit well with the average conservative in the state of Mississippi. By the way, a lot of people having second thoughts about the voting for President Obama. In fact, I had this poll in my stack yesterday, and I didn't talk about it because the numbers seemed so dramatic to me that I thought, I'm going to have to check this out. I got to get some verification before I go with these numbers. But apparently these are the actual results from a poll that was done by economist/YouGov.com. And the question was very simple. Do you regret voting for Barack Obama? That's the question. Do you regret voting for Barack Obama? That's it. Simple question, yes or no, straight up, not a complicated question. 71% of the people that voted for Obama says yes. 71%. I regret my vote for Barack Obama. Only 26% said no, I don't regret voting for him. 80% of white Americans said I regret my vote. 61% of blacks said no, they don't regret their vote for him. But notice what that means. I mean, that could mean up to 39% of black Americans say they do regret voting for Barack Obama. Remember, they voted for him somewhere in the 95, 96% range, 93 to 96%, somewhere in there. And now the number that regret voting for him is up to 39%. Only 7% didn't vote for him. Now up to 39% saying, I regret having voted for him in 2012. And listen to this, 100% of Hispanics, 100% of Hispanics, I don't even know how to calibrate this or understand it. I don't understand it. But this is the result of their poll. 100% of Hispanics said they regretted voting for Barack Obama. Remember, 71% of them voted for Barack Obama over Mitt Romney. Now, every one of them, every last single one of them, regrets having voted for Barack Obama. And see, what that tells me is the Republican Party does not need to pander to Hispanics because they're smart enough to figure out that there are policies that are bad for America, bad for them, bad for the dreams that they have for their life in America. Even 55% of Democrats said they regretted their vote for Obama. 71% of independents said they regretted their vote for Obama. Another quick item, this is from Georgia. The House of Representatives in the state of Georgia has voted to allow concealed carry in churches, as well as airports and bars. Now, this reminded me of something. We've talked about it before, but it's worth revisiting because not a lot of people know this. People think of carrying a gun to church and they're kind of scandalized. You don't want to take a gun into the house of God. But, we've had some very high-profile attacks on churches in the middle of worship, Wednesday night prayer services, pastors being shot. Well, that's happened in the last year a couple of times. Guys walking into church and shooting the pastor right in the chest in front of the whole congregation. So churches are not immune from violence. And the Georgia House said, look, you can carry a concealed weapon in a church. It's been banned before. You can carry in a church now. What a lot of people don't realize is back in the colonial era, this, I believe, was in the colony of Virginia, back before it became a state. But in the early days, this is back in it dates to the 17th century, where they had a lot of trouble from hostile Native American tribes. And what these hostile Native American tribes figured out pretty quickly is, say, everybody in this community in the Virginia colony, they all go to church on Sunday morning. And they don't take their guns with them. So everybody in these villages that we want to raid, or these communities that we want to pillage, they're all in the same place at the same time, and they are completely without self-defense. So that's the time to strike. We're going to hit them at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning. So Virginia actually passed a law that required you to take a weapon with you into church. You would have been breaking the law if you did not pack heat into church. And that's so they could be prepared to repel these attacks from the hostile tribes around them. Came across an article today that indicated that the federal government has been closed 25% of the time in this fiscal year, starting October 1. People that work in D.C. have been home 25% of the time. Offices in Washington, D.C. have been closed in whole or in part 27 of the 105 weekdays so far in the fiscal year. Neither the House nor the Senate has worked a full Monday to Friday work week in 2014. I want you to think for a minute how many 5-day work weeks you've put in since October 1. I mean, you start counting up, and maybe you've got a week or two of vacation in there. Maybe you took some time off for Christmas. But you look at October, November, December, that's about 12 weeks roughly. So maybe you take a week or two off. So let's say 10 weeks. Then you have January and February. It's another 8 weeks. That's 18. You've probably worked 18 full weeks since October 1. The House and the Senate, neither of them has worked a 5-day work week this entire year, this entire fiscal year starting October 1. House members have been in session for 17 of the 35 weekdays so far this year. That's just in calendar year 2014, which is less than 50%, obviously. Senators have been in full session for 18 of the 35 weekdays, barely 50%. I don't know. I'd love a job where I only had to show up to work 50% of the time and got $174,000 a year. That would suit me just fine. A number to call if you want to join our conversation is 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. And I want to take the last few minutes of this segment to follow up on a story that I brought you yesterday, which is a threat that is posed to American Family Radio by the FCC. And I suggested yesterday the strategy that the Obama administration is going to follow to take us out. If they're going to take us out, and I believe they have intentions that are sinister toward all conservative groups, we have the most anti-Christian president we've ever had in our history, the most hostile president to Christianity that we have ever had in the history of the Republic. He is a determined opponent of the Tea Party. He's a determined opponent of voters' guides produced by pro-family groups like ours. Now, whether we're specifically on his radar or not, I don't know. I'm not saying that they're sitting there strategizing about how to take out American Family Radio. But we are a part of the cluster of organizations that they want to neutralize. They want to silence us. They want to marginalize us. And I said yesterday, one of the ways they're going to do it is through the FCC because, the idea in America is that the American people own the airwaves. And the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, they're stewards of the people's airwaves, and they have to make sure that they are used responsibly. And if they discover, therefore, this is where it's going, I mean, to connect the dots is pretty easy, that if these airwaves belong to the people, then the FCC, under this administration, can easily say, look, these airwaves belong to the people. They don't belong to the American Family Association. They belong to the American people. We cannot allow the people's airwaves to be used to promote hate speech, to promote hatred, to promote bigotry, to promote homophobia. The Supreme Court has already said if you support natural marriage, there's something wrong with you. You've got animus, you've got hatred in your heart. You intend harm against homosexual people if you do nothing more than just support natural marriage. That's what the Supreme Court said in their DOMA ruling last year. The only possible reason to support natural marriage is because you hate homosexuals. So it's hatred. By definition, according to the Supreme Court, you support man-woman marriage, you're a hater. You're a homophobe. And so it's easy to see the FCC could say, look, we cannot allow the people's airwaves to be used to promote what even the Supreme Court has said is homophobia. And it turns out things are even worse than I thought. Here's a piece on the Wall Street Journal posted by a man by the name of Ajit Pai. He's one of the commissioners on the FCC, and he wrote this op-ed to warn the American people because he was in the minority when this effort was launched. Here are some excerpts from his piece. And he starts off by saying, look, the government has no place pressuring media organizations into covering certain stories. Absolutely true. That's the First Amendment, freedom of the press. That belongs to everybody. And Congress is what? Prohibited. Congress is prohibited from abridging the freedom of the press and freedom of speech. So he goes on. Unfortunately, the FCC, where I am a commissioner, does not agree. Last May, the FCC proposed an initiative to thrust the federal government into newsrooms across the country with its, quote, multi-market study of critical information needs. Now, he goes on to say, look, this is just the fairness doctrine rebranded. That's all this is. This is the fairness doctrine, all dressed up with a different name, the study of critical information needs. With this study, the agency plans to send researchers to grill reporters, editors, and station owners about how they decide which stories to run. Field tests in Columbia, South Carolina is scheduled to begin this spring. The purpose of the CIN, according to the FCC, is to ferret out information from television and radio broadcasters. Catch that. This is where AFA gets caught in the web, AFR, to ferret out information from television and radio broadcasters about, quote, the process by which stories are selected, end quote, and how often stations cover, quote, critical information needs, end quote, along with, get this, along with perceived station bias. That's what they're looking for. They're going to send researchers to radio stations, maybe they'll send them here to AFR, to see if they can detect perceived station bias. Well, I'll tell you right now, I've told you before, yes, we are biased here at AFR. We are absolutely biased. We are biased in favor of the Bible. We are biased in favor of the Judeo-Christian tradition. We choose stories because they illustrate something that we find in the Judeo-Christian tradition and what's good for our culture based on those values. We are biased, happy to admit it. Focal Point AFR Talk.